Assalamu alaikum, people listening and watching. You're tuning into the Let's Walk podcast. I am your host Ataur Rahman, and today's guest is Jared Lane, joining me all the way from the US. And Jared, I'm happy to have you on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I love podcasts. This is fun.
We like whenever we start an episode, we start with a controversial question or some mind-boggling questions. So, my question for you is. Going to school for music versus directly going into the field, or directly basically not going to school and entering into the field.
So with music, it's you can see it in two ways. So if you're going for more of the traditional route of performance, so like if you're trying to become a performer in like an orchestral instrument like cello or violin or stuff like that, it's a lot like the medical field where the level of training you need you can really only find at a university. So in terms of that, it would be needed. It's definitely worth it to go. If you're trying to get into like music production or something, so if your ultimate goal is to like make beats and sell them online, college could definitely be helpful, but there are vast resources out there where you can teach yourself that if you want to. You just have to be able to use them and keep learning consistently. Like that's one of the things about college is like even if you could learn it outside of college, there's still the aspect of college forces you to learn it in a way that browsing the YouTube videos or buying an online course for whatever you're learning doesn't quite do it. So it kind of depends what area of music you're trying to go into, for sure.
Are you preferring that the college is a little bit more structured, because YouTube and online courses, they are like so vast, you basically cannot choose. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah. The structure that college provides definitely helps you kind of focus your learning, because like I learned a lot of music production stuff on YouTube because my undergrad wasn't necessarily in music production. But when I first started getting into it, it was quite overwhelming with how much goes into it and how many videos there are out there. So I ended up having to find a producer and meet with him a couple times to get my head wrapped around it. And then the YouTube became much more helpful. And so college is like that, meeting with that producer once or twice because they know where you are and how to get you from point A to point B.
Makes sense. So like tell us about how, like, basically what was your major in college, and like basically what did you study, so that we can have some questions about that.
Yeah, so I started college as a music ed degree. So I plan to go through, get certified to teach music and then teach in the schools. And as I went through that, I loved the ed classes, and I really enjoyed that part of it. But I didn't really feel that this was where I could help a lot and where my skill sets and passions really work together. I still love teaching and I still teach private lessons and stuff like that. But I just wasn't quite sure that this is part of me felt like, oh, I'm doing music ed because it's an easy job when I get out of school and blah, 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 blah. But then my junior year, the college revamped the music department. And along with that reworking of its structure, they created a music composition degree. And so I switched to that at the end of my sophomore year, ended up graduating with music composition. And so in undergrad, I mainly studied like concert composition and chamber work, so smaller ensembles for instruments like piano and cello, like orchestral instruments and stuff like that. But around that time, I started seeing all the possibilities in terms of like film scoring or writing music for television libraries and just all these avenues for composition that I didn't realize were there. And so I started meeting like with that producer to start learning that side of it as I was learning the concert music. And so then when I graduated, I started studying with a film composer and have just been kind of dabbling in that and slowly growing my freelance work until that's my main deal.
So how is concert work different from orchestra and like it's music, right? I'm not from not from the music background, so
Yeah. So basically, with a smaller ensemble, from a composer's perspective, it gives you, believe it or not, more options because when you have 60 players playing something, the amount of complexity each part can do um, lessens significantly. Because if you have 12 violinists playing one part, doing something that's fairly technically difficult is going to sound like mush because there's 12 players playing it all at slightly different times or all at different skill levels. Whereas, like, if you have a string quartet with, one of each string instrument, you can do a whole lot more, different harmonies and things like that. So it's not, in terms of writing the music and, the techniques, it's not any different. Um, but like chamber music, which is like smaller ensembles, is, I guess, gives you more opportunity to explore. Whereas orchestra, it's really cool and exciting to write for orchestra, but you explore in different ways with that, and you can't get quite as crazy with an orchestra.
so where do you incline towards?
Um, hmm. I mean, I really like them both. Or writing for an orchestra kind of has a certain thrill to it, just because I mean, it's an orchestra, and like if you stand in front of, I've had an orchestra play one of my pieces live once, and it's just it's crazy. I mean, you're sitting there, all these people are playing the music, and you've only heard it either in your head or with like a really bad sounding MIDI, mock up on your notation software. And so there's a certain thrill to that. But I think, hmm, I don't know. I mainly write orchestral stuff for film, but I do really enjoy writing for a small ensemble. I just like the sound, and experimenting and coming up with really cool sounding harmonies. So I like them both. There's thrill and then there's experimenting.
Sounds nice.
Yeah.
So how did you find mentors? You said you met up with a producer, then you met up with a film producer. So how did you find these mentors?
Um, that's a good question. Let me think. So the first guy that really helped me learn the basics of music production and stuff, um, he was someone said, "Hey, I know this guy. He's been working in the music industry. He's fairly successful in it." And so, um, I think I found him on Facebook and sent him a message. Um, and then I started having lessons with him, or lessons where I would like write pieces and bring them to him, and we would mix it and he'd give me feedback on my mixes and things I could do to make them sound better. Um, and then I still keep in touch with him. I don't do lessons with him anymore since I moved away from where I went to college. And now, being in my master's degree, um, the my main mentor is honestly my composition teacher, where he's a working film. He teaches online because he's in LA and works as a film composer, and that's really the only reason I came to this university, is because I wanted to work with him. Um, and so, but I consider him a mentor because, really, with any of the professors that I interact with a lot in any degree program, I really pursue a relationship that goes much past like a normal student teacher relationship into more of a mentorship, where he's not just teaching me composition techniques, but he's teaching me through all of his experiences with directors and producers and how he's handled stuff, and you just kind of sit there and absorb it, and take notes and pack it away for when you need it. In Instagram, honestly, I have this one guy that I'll ask questions to, who's a film composer in, the east of the U.S., and I just started talking to him, and I think I got his attention through the way Richard used Ed too. So I shared one of his Instagram posts to get into his DMs, and so now we talk back and forth sometimes.
Wow. That's some nice trick. So anybody listening, they can use the same trick, And talking about Richard, how did you come basically come across Richard? Like the initial video or the post. How did you come across Richard basically?
Well, I've like always been fascinated with productivity because I think it correlates really well to the creative industry too. And so I love that. And so I think one day I was just kind of bored. And so I was scrolling through YouTube and I think I saw um his most common like day in the life one, the one where he's like in the library looking exhausted, looking at his computer, and it's like 4:30 a.m. morning routine or whatever. And I think that's how I found him. And I kept watching his stuff because I really liked his motivation behind everything. Of you do all this stuff to serve other people, and you don't settle for mediocrity because if you do, that's not in the best service of other people. So keep pushing yourself to be the best. And he's also like super relatable because he went through all of college just like I did, and he's 22, around the same age and stuff, and it's just super relatable. So that I kept following him.
Nice. So you mentioned productivity, right? So like I maybe do some vocal singing and whatnot, sometimes, but other than that, editing and whatnot. So like I want to know what's the workflow for a creative. There's two debates we usually see when it comes to productivity as a creative. One is the flow that people they struggle getting into the flow, and when they get into the flow they don't break it. And you mentioned in one of your videos that you need to break the flow so that the next time when you come into the session you are more than pumped. What's your take on that?
Yeah, so I've experimented with this a lot. So a couple summers ago, when I first started getting into music production, I kind of adopted the mentality of don't interrupt the flow. So there'd be nights when I'd go to bed at like a normal time, and other times where I'd be really into it and then go till like 3, 4 a.m. and then be like, yeah, the flow stopped, and then go to bed. And I mean, it's I got a lot done, but I didn't feel like any other part of my life was as good as it could be. Because everything had to shift whenever the flow came, or whenever the spark came. So everything had to submit to the flow. And I was like, I don't like that. And so I ended up reading a book. What's it called?
Is it Rest?
Yeah, Rest. I mentioned it so many times. Oops. And he talks about authors like Stephen King and composers like Tchaikovsky and Brahms and Beethoven and all these things, and talks about their routines. And like Stephen King, I think I said this in one of my videos, I'm repeating myself, but he'll write for 6 hours and he'll stop. Even if he feels in the flow, he'll just stop, because going with the creative flow isn't sustainable at all. I mean, that's a surefire way to get burnout, to be sleep deprived, to not be healthy, for other areas of your life to start declining. So it's just not sustainable at all. And so I really took that to heart of instead of always going with the flow, adopting a routine that can capture that like creative inspiration and flow when it comes, but also realize that flow can't govern my life. And so when it's time to stop work, it's time to stop work, but also realizing that you still kind of have to show up to work even if you're not feeling inspired. But then usually a lot of like motivation follows action. A lot of the times creativity often follows action too. So even if I'm not feeling inspired and I sit down and I start, eventually things will start going.
Yes, that's so on point, like sometimes you don't feel like editing or whatnot. You just sit on the chair, you start doing like one thing, yeah, let me trim it from here, and then suddenly you get into the flow. So we have like I've heard as a kid, like Beethoven, he used to compose and whatnot. He never used to change his shoes, and all the sweat and whatnot, his skin used to come out, and all sorts of things. But now listening to this, it's like, yeah, you can do it for one day, but you cannot do it for 10 years, right?
No, you really can't.
So if you have to play the long game, I think being consistent with the, like, having a set schedule and being consistent, I think like eventually will triumph the flow.
Yep, that's right, for sure.
So yourself being a practicing Christian, like how has faith impacted your composing?
I think one of the biggest things, I think there are two big things of how it's impacted. Um, one of the things is the concept of rest in the Bible is huge. Of like in the Old Testament, I mean, within the first 10 minutes of reading, you see this part of God created everything, and then he stopped and admired his work and rested. And then you have him telling his people to do the same thing, and then you have Jesus coming and say, take my yoke, for it is easy and it is light. Or do you see the sparrow? He doesn't worry about the food he's going to get, or the lilies. Not even the richest guy in the world is clothed better than those, and they don't worry. I mean, obviously, flower doesn't worry, but the point is and I see this a lot throughout the music industry. Of it's like, man, this has got to be perfect, and I got to hustle, and if I don't hustle, if I mess up this project, then this director is going to let all of his director buddies know, and all the future projects with that group of people are just gonna go away. And there's this feeling of like, man, if I don't do this right, if I don't sacrifice the next month to make sure this is amazing, then who knows if I'm gonna get another project. And there's part of being a freelancer is, there's not a paycheck coming in every month. It's dependent upon more projects coming in. And so that idea of rest, of knowing that, we often think that we are not finite human beings that have to sleep, that have to eat, that have to rest, that have to be with other people. And when we're not doing that, our work often suffers a lot. So the biblical concept of resting, of being in community and things like that, not only keep us from burnout, but they also help us be even more creative. And I think another big thing is, the Bible talks about being excellent in all things. And so, like I mentioned, like Richard Yu talks about not settling for mediocrity. And so it's like, as a Christian, I'm called to serve everyone in my life, and to better the world, basically. And so because of that, I should do whatever my work is to the best of my ability all the time, and always strive to be better, but not in an all-consuming sense, because there's that rest part to balance it out, right? But to really desire that the music I write is as good as it can be, because I know that people are going to listen to it, and it's going to make their day better, or it's going to help them make sense of a situation, or when they watch that movie and that story, it's going to hit a chord with that person. And because the music was as excellent as I could make it, the story was really impactful to that person, and helped that person through a certain time. So that degree of excellence really helps me to strive to always be better,
Like you mentioned, the act of service, and how you are impacting other people with your craft. And I want to know what is that one thing which drives you. Is it something from the childhood, or is it like that I want to serve the I want to serve my community, or is it something like I don't want to live with uh, untapped potential? Like what is it?
Um, hmm. I think um, like as a kid, I dreamed of doing something in music, so there was that like dream. Um, but now, honestly, I don't know how to say it. Um, I often find myself or catching myself in like this kind of thinking of like I want to film compose because it's what makes me happy or whatever, um but then I started thinking of like that's not whenever I fall into that rut, I often find that I feel fairly miserable, um and I just I don't mean to sound altruistic or anything like that, but I just find myself when I really sit down and consider, what I'm doing, um, of just being incredibly thankful that I get to do this thing that I dreamed of as a kid, and that I don't want to squander it, um, by having the motivation of, oh, it just makes me happy. I get to do this thing that I've always wanted to do, and I feel so incredibly fortunate that this is where God has me. Of like, man, this has God's put me where I've always dreamed of being, and so being in the spot where I've dreamed has got to help other people get to that spot. It's got to help get rid of some kind of suffering. It's got to heal people, and it's also of like God put me in this spot, and He's given me some manner of aptitude towards music, and so I want to steward this position as best as I can. Because like when I look back at my life, where I am, I'm like, man, I didn't really do that. I mean, all these like situations, that one person knowing that one mentor that I had that got me here. And I look back and I was like, I mean, I was there and I kind of took the opportunities as they came, but I didn't feel like I created those opportunities. So I'm like, I got to steward this, you know, almost as like a gift back to him of, you know, getting as good as I can and helping other people in appreciation for what God has done to put me in this spot is a big motivator.
uh, oh, that really makes like that's so insightful. Like you mentioned that you're not only happy that you are able to do what you're able to do, but also grateful that you are able to impact by doing what you do
Hmm.
to other people. Wow, that's insightful. That's something to ponder upon, because not a lot of people get the opportunity to do what they want to do. Like some might have to take up a job which they don't like due to a financial situation, or go up into a career. Sometimes parents and whatnot, like situations happens. They have to pursue some other career, and that's something to consider. And I think that's really insightful. And moving on, like this is a classic question. I ask people who are usually content creators and freelancers, that what is that one thing, like, how do you stay original basically? And because you see sometimes I say something and then I reflect, and then I'm like, is this what Gary Vee said in that video? I mean, I don't want to be like the rip-off version of Gary Vee, right? I want to be me, that sort of thing. Do you have the similar scenario going on in the music industry?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, like, especially in scoring for films or anything like that, there's a certain sound to comedy. There's a certain Marvel has a certain sound. Every genre has a sound that's associated with that genre, and you have to work on it, work in that. Like right now, um, I'm working on a heisty kind of spy film, and they have a very specific, like, think Mission Impossible, Ocean's 11, James Bond kind of deal. They have a sound like you immediately know, oh, this is a spy film, or they're stealing something in this film. You just immediately know. And so there is a concept of using what other people have used, but then also putting your own twist in it and giving the movie or your song a unique spin. Because it's like we don't consider Beethoven unoriginal, but he used and built upon the foundations that Haydn and Mozart did, and Haydn and Mozart built upon the foundations that Bach did, and Bach built upon the foundations that Gabrielli did, and Gabrielli, Guido, and it's just like it goes back and back and back and back. So all these fields we work in are built upon the foundations laid by people who came before us, and so I don't consider that not being me. I see that as like a big, honestly, that restraint of being stuck in spy film kind of sparks creativity of like, okay, I'm in this genre and I could be really cliche and I could like go the easy route, be cliche, be done with it, or I could figure out a way to do just something crazy in this genre, and that constraint forces you to come up with things that you just never would come up with. Like looking at the film suite for this film, I was like, man, when I was in college, I never would have thought I'd be writing this, but because of that constraint, I wrote something that I think is fairly unique and it's kind of cool. And so I don't think using techniques by other people doesn't necessarily mean it's not you. It's just another way to be creative. I mean, obviously don't copy and copy paste it, but it's almost like a challenge to use things other people have done and then make it your own.
Yeah, sort of more like improve or give it your own twist, like you mentioned.
Yeah.
I want to know, what do you do to get in the flow? Like do you close your door? Do you switch off like all the devices, put on some like music, or like what do you do to get in the flow?
So I think it's just I kind of have a routine that helps me get in it. So basically what that routine is I wake up, I go make coffee, I sit down and I read for a little bit. And then for the first hour and a half after I like do devos and read and sometimes journal, I'll turn off my phone and toss it across the room. And I'll start writing for music for an hour and a half straight. And then usually I'll take a break after that for a little bit, and then keep going and going. And I think it's mainly the routine. And also, I always light a candle for some reason. I just love candles. And so, like, how like Richard, he has that like wristband he puts on. For me, it's kind of like the candle of like I light the candle and it's time to work kind of a deal. And so I'll do stupid little things like that. But like I was saying, of like you set up a routine to catch the flow of I just kind of go through the same routine every morning and I'm just kind of used to it. So when I sit down, I'll usually have something to be able to do. Does that make sense?
Yep, it does. It's a more sort of an athlete's pre-game routine. Like some athletes, they tie in their shoes, and some athletes they put on the music. Some athletes, this sit in front of the bus and they're quiet and it looks like they are going through some trauma or something, and
Yeah.
suddenly they are the best performer in the game or something. So I think it's unique to different people, and like you mentioned, Richard has a unique pre-game routine or pre-day. Like it's almost like as if he's going to war.
Yeah, it really is.
It's like yes, I got my weapons ready. I have the ammo and
Yeah.
that sort of thing. And with that, I want to know what do you do to keep up to date with the music industry, or like how do you keep yourself fresh so that you are up to date with all the knowledge that's happened, like all the things that are happening, or like Do you have some news platform or some research, or like what happens?
I don't try to keep up with a lot of the I guess the news of the music industry. Um, so I don't really concern myself with that. I will. There are a couple of people that I follow that are kind of like big people in the music industry, and I kind of respect how they see things. So I will read their stuff or listen to some of their stuff. But definitely not news outlets, because usually, as someone in the creative industry, the stuff the news outlets are putting out really isn't that useful. Um, to stay like fresh and inspired, just like an entrepreneur would read a book about business, um, to stay inspired and up to date. For me as a musician, that's honestly, it sounds like a cop out, but it's honestly listening to different styles of music. Sometimes I'll buy a score of a film and I'll sit down and I'll watch the film and I'll follow along the score and like take notes about what they did. And I consider that a lot like reading a business book for an entrepreneur. It's kind of the same deal. I'm just getting ideas and listening for things that I can use in my next project. So that's one of the big things I use to stay fresh. And YouTube, honestly, there are a couple of people that are just way better than me that have YouTube channels, and I'll watch their stuff and learn techniques from them.
Mm, Yep, yep. It's a sort of like I said, it's sort of unique, like sometimes I talk to people and they have some sort of they try to keep up to date, so that they can like you mentioned, you do keep up to date with a few specific artists that you respect, and like their view on their perspective. And yeah, some people, I think, the thing with being a creative is, that if you keep up to date with a lot of things, it's like too much, I feel, is it overwhelming, like this?
Yeah, I find that if I'm, um, I guess, like taking in a lot, it's just kind of there's so many things swirling around my brain. It's hard to focus when I sit down to focus on writing music. So I think in a big way of like, and it's not like you're limiting input or anything like that. It's just being aware that always consuming media isn't necessarily the best thing for being creative, even though it might seem like it.
Yep, yep. So moving on, this is the last part of the podcast called Perspective, where I ask questions about life to bring life in perspective. So the first question is, what is one thing that the pandemic has taught you?
I think one of the biggest things it's taught me is being being busy does not mean success or that you're gaining ground. Um, Being busy is simply being busy, and you might be doing all the wrong things. You know, um, so because I'm always someone who is um, kind of sort of like a little uncomfortable with having too much free time. Of like I should be doing something all the time. But the pandemic comes, and especially the summer after, I wrapped up school online. I was like, I was working, but it was just like a normal amount of work, and I was like, man, this is weird. I don't know what's going on. I'm not super busy. Does that mean I'm not making any ground? But I ended up making a lot of headway. I was able to assist a few composers on some projects, and I did my first couple paid projects that summer, but I wasn't incredibly busy, and so I think the biggest thing is that busyness is not an indicator of success or that you're making ground. It's not a good way
Uh,
to measure it.
uh, that's something, I I'm trying to embrace more in my life. And I'm not sure if you're aware with Cal Newport's work, and he says something along the lines of pseudo work, where you feel like you're doing work and you are not basically doing like the real work.
Hmm.
And this is something, I do deal with. It's like maybe scrolling through YouTube or something, and basically justifying that I'm doing some sort of work, but actually I'm not doing. And uh, Yeah, that's one thing, I'm also working on. And this brings me to the second question, which is, if you were to meet three people, dead or alive, who would they be and why?
I already meet three people. Who would they be
Yep.
and why? Um, so the first person that popped in my head, he might be because he's a topic of my paper, and he's alive, is this composer named Arvo Pärt. He's an Estonian composer. He's coming up 90 years old now. But he's just had like a really interesting life. Like he and his family had to. He was a fairly high-profile composer during the time of the Soviet Union, and because of the censorship of the arts, he and his family actually had to flee, the Soviet Union and the Soviet states, and like live in Germany or West Germany for a while, for like 30 years or something like that. And he's back in Estonia now, but he's a he's a Christian too, and the deep integration of his composition techniques with his faith is just awesome. And his compositional techniques are just some of the most beautiful things I've heard. And it's so simple, but it's so beautiful. So he would be a person I'd want to meet. And he also just seems like a really nice guy when you watch his interviews. He just seems like a very joyful person. Another person I would want to meet would be, um, oh man, there's so many people. I don't want to do just composers. Another person I guess I would love to meet, would be John Williams for obvious reasons. Just because he's like the main inspiration for why I do what I do, and so that'd be awesome to meet him, and just to talk to him. And he also seems like a very joyful, energetic person. And then what would be another person that I want to meet? Someone super interesting. Hmm. Ooh, I'm stuck between a couple people here. Um, I would want to meet. Oh, what's his name? I can't think of his name, and this is like someone I'd want to meet. I'm trying to think of all the people that are like alive. Um, Let me see. Um, just on a side note, I'd love to meet that composer I talked to on Instagram a lot. That'd be cool. But I would love to. I can't think of a name. Oh, here we go. This is just me being me. I would love to meet someone like um, Nancy Pelosi or Kamala Harris, because I disagree with their political views a lot, and I would love to talk to them and just because we disagree to the point of where I'm like, how did you get to thinking like that was a good idea or something like that. So I'd love to talk to them and just listen to their of how they arrived at their political and
Their
economic
thought process,
conclusions.
basically.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I'd love to talk to them just to hear completely different opinions from myself. So
You are basically the second person, who wanted to meet a person who they disagree with on the
yeah,
podcast. Like the second person, I had a scientist, before, an agriculture scientist, and he said he wanted to meet our prime minister, basically Narendra Modi, to basically discuss with him and understand like the why is he putting certain policies into place. So congratulations on being the second person.
yes.
So, Jared, where is the best place people can find you and come in contact with you?
um, the best place to find me would honestly be Instagram. Um, Jared_Lane_composer. And then if you want to like see some of my music and my work and stuff, there's my website, which is Jared M. Lane. A little narcissistic, but it works. It's easy to remember. And then the YouTube channel, also by the same name.
So, people listening and watching, this brings us to the end of the podcast. I hope you took some value out of this, and just because I learned a lot. And until then, you guys know what to do. Stay blessed, keep taking action, and we'll see you in the next one.